Ну так, и я продолжаю слушать достаточно интересный диалог. Не знаю, для кого-то может он быть неинтересный, но тем не менее он вроде бы как там будет очень долго длиться, но я его возьму полностью. Так что как-то так.
Only
Поехали.
solvable in English. It didn't matter that the masquerade jewel was only worth a few $1,000s. Many seekers spent far more than that in their months of exploration and travel. It was the thrill of the chase, the possibility of being the one. Treasure hunts, secret messages, and hidden things seem to exert an irresistible appeal. They're fun to look for and to talk about, and this fact of human psychology has been exploited in computer games since the earliest days. It finds expression in the hidden surprises we call Easter eggs. Atari's Stephen Wright is credited with coining this term in the first issue of Electronic Games magazine. The first Easter egg in a commercial computer game appeared in an early Atari 2600 cartridge called, simply enough, Adventure. By a sequence of unlikely movements and obscure manipulations, players could discover a secret room where the words "Created by Warren Robinette" appeared in flashing letters. Over the decades, Easter eggs and their evil twin, cheat codes, have become an industry within an industry. Entire magazines and websites are now devoted to their carefully orchestrated discovery and dissemination. They're part of our toolkit, our basic vocabulary, the language of computer game design. Computer gamers may have been the first to refer to hidden surprises as Easter eggs, but we certainly weren't the first to use them. Painters, composers, and artists of every discipline have been hiding stuff in their works for centuries. The recent advent of VCRs and Laserdisc players with freeze-frame capability exposed decades of secret Disney erotica. Thomas Kincaid, the self-appointed painter of light, amuses himself by hiding the letter N in his works. A number beside his signature indicates how many N's are hidden in each painting. Picasso, Dali, Raphael, Poussin, and dozens of other painters concealed all kinds of stuff in their paintings. A favorite trick was hiding portraits of themselves, their families, friends, and fellow artists in crowd scenes. El Greco loved dogs, but the Catholic Church forbid him from including any in his sacred paintings. So he hid them, usually within the outlines of celestial clouds. Composer Dmitri Shostakovich chafed under the political censorship imposed by the Soviet Ministry of Culture. His symphonies and chamber works are loaded with hidden signatures and subversive subtexts which, had they been recognized, would have sent him to Siberia. Mozart's opera, The Magic Flute, is filled with musical allusions to the rituals of the Freemasons, the ancient secret society of which he and his mentor Haydn were members. But the most famous purveyor of Easter eggs is that champion of the late Baroque, the ultimate musical nerd, Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach was a student of gematria, the art of assigning numeric values to letters of the alphabet. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, etc. By comparing, sequencing, or otherwise manipulating these numbers, secret messages can be concealed. Bach took particular delight in the geometrical numbers 14 and 41. 14 is the sum of the initials of his last name. B equals 2, A equals 1, C equals 3, and H equals 8. 41 is the sum of his expanded initials, J.S. Bach. These two numbers show up over and over again in Bach's compositions. One of the better-known examples is his setting of the chorale Vor deinem Thron. The first line of the melody contains exactly 14 notes. and the entire melody, from start to finish, contains 41. Another of Bach's favorite games was the puzzle canon. A canon is a melody that sounds good when you play it on top of itself, a little bit out of sync. Frere Jacques and Row, Row, Row Your Boat are familiar examples of simple, two-voice canons. But a canon can employ any number of voices, and you don't have to play each voice the same way either. You can change the octave, transpose the key, invert the pitch, play it backwards, or any combination. Finding melodies that make good multi-voice canons is a fussy and difficult art, of which Bach was an undisputed master. Now, in a puzzle canon, the composer specifies the basic melody and the number of voices, but not the relationship of the voices. The student has to figure out the position and key of each voice, and whether to perform them inverted and/or backwards. Bach wrote quite a number of puzzle canons. The most famous, BWV 1076, is part of a fascinating story. One of Bach's students was a fellow by the name of Lorenz Misler, founder of the Society of Musical Science. This elite, invitation-only institution devoted itself to the study of Pythagorean philosophy and the union of music and mathematics. Its distinguished membership reads like a who's who of German composers, including Handel, Telemann, and eventually Mozart. Applicants for membership in the society were required to submit an oil portrait of themselves, along with a specimen of original music. With nerdly efficiency, Society member number 14 decided to combine these admission requirements into a single work. He sat for a portrait with Elias Haussmann, official artist at the court of Dresden. This portrait, which now hangs in the gallery of the town hall in Leipzig, is the only indisputably authentic image of Bach in existence. The Haussmann portrait shows Bach dressed in a formal coat with exactly 14 buttons. In his hand is a sheet of music paper, upon which is written a puzzle canon for 6 simultaneous voices. In 1974, a manuscript was discovered which proved that this canon was the 13th in a series of exactly 14 canons based on the ground theme of the famous Goldberg variations. As if these musical gymnastics weren't enough, Bach liked to hide messages in his compositions by assigning notes to the letters. His initials, B-A-C-H, correspond to the pitch sequence B flat, A, C, and B natural in German letter notation. This theme makes its most memorable appearance in the last bars of his final composition, The Art of Fugue, published soon after his death in 1750. The word fugue comes from the Latin fuga, which means flight, as in running away. So the art of fugue is the art of flight, the art of taking a theme and running with it. Bach wrote hundreds of fugues, but none as sublime as this sequence of 14. In the last and most complicated fugue in the series, the first and second sections develop normally. This is followed by the B-A-C-H signature, and then suddenly, without any warning or structural justification, the fugue stops, dead in its tracks. One of the composer's 20 children, his son Carl Philipp Emanuel, claimed that Bach died moments after those last few notes were written. This story is probably apocryphal. The Easter eggs in Bach's music are a pleasant obscurity, known chiefly to professors and students of Baroque music. But in March of 2002, when this lecture was first delivered, those Easter eggs were the talk of the entire classical music industry. Sitting near the top of the classical music charts that month was a compact disc on the ECM label called Morimer. It was performed by the Hilliard Choral Ensemble, together with a talented but, until then, little-known violinist, Christoph Poppen. The music on Morimer is based on a geometrical analysis of Bach's Partita in D minor for solo violin. This analysis, by German professor Helga Thon, assigns numeric values to the duration of notes, the number of bars, and the German letter notation of the partita. In doing so, she claims to have discovered the complete text of several liturgical ceremonies encoded in the notes. The CD presented these hidden texts superimposed over the original music. The result was strangely melancholy, dark, haunting, and very, very popular. Quite a few music critics attacked this disc. They didn't buy Professor Thon's analysis, dismissing it as a combination of numerology and canny marketing. Their caution was not without basis. Numerology is a slippery slope down which many a fine mind has slid to its doom. Allow me to offer an amusing anecdote from my own experience. Back in the early 90s, before the internet took off, one of the more popular online bulletin board systems was a service called Prodigy. I bought an account on Prodigy so I could join a fraternal interest group and gossip with fellow members around the country. One day, a stranger appeared on our bulletin board. Right away, I knew we were in trouble. This fellow, whose name was Gary, began spouting all kinds of apocalyptic nonsense about worldwide conspiracies, secret societies, and devil worship. At first, we tried to be polite. We questioned his sources, corrected his histories, logically refuted his claims, and tried to behave in a civilized manner. But instead of soothing him, our attention only made him worse. His conspiratorial warnings became urgent, approaching hysteria. He began to threaten people who disagreed with him. To coin a phrase, Gary went all uppercase. But his most urgent warnings weren't about the gays, the Jews, the Rockefellers, or the Illuminati. According to Gary, the greatest enemy of mankind was Santa Claus. Gary claimed to possess a secret numerical formula that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Santa Claus was an avatar of the Antichrist. Intrigued, we pressed Gary to reveal his formula. In doing so, we walked right into his trap. We should have known he had a book to sell. I fell for it. I sent him the $15. Less than a week later, the book arrived. Above an ominous photograph of the Washington Monument was emblazoned the title, 666, The Final Warning. Inside this privately printed 494-page monster, Gary reveals a simple geometrical formula, which he claims was developed by the ancient Sumerians. This formula assigns successive products of 6 to each letter of the alphabet. A equals 6, B equals 12, C equals 18, etc. Imagine my dismay when I applied this ancient formula to the name Santa Claus and obtained the blasphemous sum of 666, the biblical number of the beast. I went on Prodigy and reported to the stunned members of our interest group that Gary was right after all. There could be no doubt that according to the unimpeachable wisdom of ancient Samaria, Santa Claus was the Antichrist. I then went on to point out several other names which, when submitted to Gary's formula, also produced the sum 666. Names like St. James, New York, and New Mexico. Soon the bulletin board was filled with discoveries like computer, Boston tea, and most sinister of all, sing karaoke. Gary left us alone after that. I got my $15 worth. But Gary is hardly the first person to connect secret codes to the Bible. People have been looking for Easter eggs in the Bible for hundreds of years. The Hebrew mystical tradition of Kabbalah can be described as a geometrical meditation on the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The advent of computers has made the application of numerology to the Bible fast and efficient. The latest spate of Bible searching was instigated by a book published in 1998 by Michael Drosnin, a former Wall Street Journal reporter. His book, The Bible Code, applied a skip cipher in which every nth character in a text is combined to form a message. By applying his skip cipher to the Hebrew text of the Old Testament, Drosnin claimed to have discovered predictions of World War II, the Holocaust, Hiroshima, the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin and both Kennedys, the moon landing, Watergate, the Oklahoma City bombing, the election of Bill Clinton, the death of Princess Di, and the comet that collided with Jupiter. He also found predictions of a giant earthquake in LA, a meteor hitting the Earth, and nuclear Armageddon, all scheduled to occur before the end of the last decade. The Bible Code spent many weeks on the bestseller lists, spawning several sequels and dozens of imitators. The Bible has certainly attracted its share of crackpots, but for the real hardcore egg hunters, nothing can rival the ingenuity, the tenacious scholarship, the stubborn zeal of those who seek the answer to the ultimate literary puzzle, a poisonous conundrum that has squandered fortunes, destroyed careers, and driven healthy, intelligent scholars to the brink of madness and beyond. Who wrote Shakespeare? The essays and books devoted to the Shakespeare authorship problem are sufficient to fill a large library. Several such libraries actually exist. Not even a day-long tutorial, much less an hour lecture, can begin to do justice to this complex, bizarre, and dangerously tantalizing story. Nevertheless, for the unacquainted, I will attempt to summarize the issue in a few paragraphs. The undisputed facts of Shakespeare's life and career could be scribbled on the back of a cocktail napkin. We know for a fact that a man named William Shakespeare was born in 1564 in or around the village of Stratford-upon-Avon. We know that he had a wife and at least 3 children. We know he bought property in Stratford, was involved in several lawsuits with his neighbors, and died there in 1616, aged 52. We also know that during those same years, a man with a last name similar to Shakespeare worked as an actor on the London stage, eventually becoming co-owner of some of the theaters there. We also know that about the same time, a number of most excellent poems and plays were published in London under the name Shakespeare. We do not know for a fact that the landowner in Stratford and the actor in London with a similar last name were one and the same man. We do not know for a fact that either man had anything to do with the poems and the plays. All we know is that those poems and plays have, in the 400 years since their composition, come to be regarded as a pinnacle of Western culture. The works attributed to Shakespeare appear to have been written by a man or woman who knew something about just about everything. They're filled with references to mythology and classic literature, games and sports, war and weapons of war, ships and sailing, the law and legal terminology, court etiquette, statesmanship, horticulture, music, astronomy, medicine, falconry, and, of course, theater. Therein lies the problem. How could a farmer's son of uncertain schooling, from a mostly illiterate country village, a man of practically no account at all, wield such encyclopedic learning, with so much eloquence and wit, so much wisdom and human understanding? For the first 150 years, nobody questioned the traditional history of the bard. Then, in the late 18th century, Reverend James Wilmot, a distinguished scholar who lived just a few miles north of Stratford, decided to write a biography of the famous playwright. Dr. Wilmot believed that a man as well educated as Shakespeare must have owned a fairly extensive library.
Ну так, я все еще тут.